Welcome to the Blue Economy CRC's first webinar series for 2023. I'm Angela Williamson. I'm Director of Blue Policy and Planning from the Blue Economy CRC. Thank you, slide. Firstly, on behalf of the Blue Economy CRC, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country and their connections to land, sea and community. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present and recognise that Australia is home to the oldest culture in the world. For those that don't know, the Blue Economy CRC was established with a 10-year lifespan under the Australian Government's Cooperative Research Centre program back in July 2019. Today, with now 44 participants from Australia and around the world, the Blue Economy CRC is focused on performing world-class, collaborative, industry-focused research and training that underpins the growth of the blue economy through increased offshore sustainable aquaculture and renewable energy production. Now I'd like to hand you over to our fabulous webinar facilitators, Christian Wies and Kenny Debut. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. For me, it's good morning because I'm at the other side of the world. My name is Christine Wies. I'm Innovation Manager for the Blue Cluster, and I'm your Belgian host for this webinar. If I seem a bit sleepy, then that's because it's early morning here. And we are very thrilled that we can organize this webinar together with the colleagues from Blue Economy CRC. Next slide, please, Kenny. The Blue Cluster is an organization supporting innovation within the blue economy. We are a Belgian-based spearhead cluster, also supported partly by the government, that brings together entrepreneurs, researchers, policymakers, citizens to design sustainable business models, set up creative partnerships, and develop groundbreaking technology within the blue economy. And our focus areas include renewable energy, aquaculture, and coastal defense. So this webinar we organize in collaboration with the Blue Economy CRC. And the topic of today is marine carbon accounting. Next slide, please. So onshore carbon accounting schemes are an incentive to implement marine carbon to implement carbon reduction techniques in several industries worldwide. However, there is currently no marine carbon credit system in place. And a blue carbon credit system will have to be based on a solid carbon accounting model. It is known that marine carbon accounting has large knowledge gaps today. And as a consequence, carbon reduction is not yet a major driver for the development of a sustainable blue economy. Applying the onshore greenhouse gas protocol for anthropogenic carbon accounting in a marine context and taking into account the best available knowledge on marine carbon accounting may constitute a step forward. So this webinar explores the need to develop such a carbon accounting system and what it could look like. The session will be closed by a panel discussion with all speakers. And for this panel discussion, we need your input. So you can go to slido.com and enter the code 3422569. And your opinion and input will help shaping the panel discussion. If you have any burning questions, you can enter them in the Q&A section of this Zoom session. And maybe your question will also be picked up during the panel discussion. Okay, so let's start with the first presentation. Angela Williamson is presented herself just a few minutes ago. She's the Director of Blue Policy and Planning at the Blue Economy CRC and brings 2 decades of ocean and sustainability related experience gained from roles in government, political offices, and the private sector. Angie's role at the Blue Economy CRC includes driving the uptake of contemporary sustainability platforms, including the development of an ocean impact balance sheet for ESG commercial ecosystems. She's focused on reimagining the ocean governance for beyond 2030, while drawing upon her experiences in marine spatial planning, oceans policy, and the design and delivery of ESG and sustainability work programs. So using Tasmania's farmed salmon industry as a case study, Ange will be discussing the elements of a sustainable ocean ambition and introducing an oceans economy balance sheet. Angela, all yours.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully this all goes well. And hopefully you can all now see my screen. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I'm really excited about being the starter of this conversation. I was telling someone a couple minutes ago that I feel like I'm on the entree, and you've got some really great presenters on our panel coming ahead. But what I'm really going to focus on today sits around putting ocean carbon accounting and nature accounting and ESG into that broader picture. So how do we get to a point where this becomes the norm, the new norm as we move forward? So as Christian outlined, I'm going to take you through a case study here in Tasmania, where I'm based, that really sets out what a sustainable ocean ambition can look like for a particular sector, being the finfish farming industry. But starting here, really, I guess mid last year, we had a challenge set to us from the top. Anyone working in oceans, anyone working in oceans food, this challenge was really put out there from the Secretary General of the United Nations in the margins of the World Ocean Conference, where he really called on us to have a look at the role of sustainable ocean economies for food, renewable energy, and livelihoods, and outlined that sustainable ocean management really could help the oceans produce as much as 6 times more food and generate 40 times more renewable energy than it currently does. But here's the kicker. We need sustainable business models for ocean economies to operate in harmony with the marine environment and to guarantee a sustainable seafood industry. So with that in mind, the Blue Economy CRC has spent 6 months working with the Tasmanian community, industry, government, and research to really understand what matters and what is motivating, whether you're in business, whether you're a concerned community citizen, whether you're a consumer or a retailer, or whether you're a government, and you're looking at how to better engage, better participate in, and better drive this particular sector and this industry. And what we really found was this industry could be dealt with sectorally, but that's kind of not what we've been talking about for a really long time. We've spent the last 20 years talking around integration and integrated oceans management. And so rather than looking at the sector by itself, how about we flip that? What could better look like? And better looks like an ocean ambition that really frames everything together. So a sustainable ocean economy underpinned by our innovative ocean industries, and in this case, we're looking at aquaculture, and trusted stewardship of our oceans and the services they provide. So with that ambition in mind, we identified a series of opportunities that we thought would be really important following a deep dive into Tasmania's current policy, regulatory and planning platform, but also understanding what's motivating industry, markets, retailers, and when you've got emerging opportunities like an ocean carbon market, or even emerging opportunities like a biodiversity market. How do we pull these all together, and how do we give them an enduring blueprint, an enduring platform? So using all of this information, and these case studies and learnings from other jurisdictions, from within Tasmania and from other ocean users, the Blue Economy CRC identified 6 ingredients to what better looks like when you're talking about oceans. We started with integrated oceans management, and that really is that shift away from just single sectors, or single sectors working alongside each other with linkers in single sector kind of way. We talked about the need for contemporary ocean leadership, and there are some really amazing examples of contemporary ocean leadership within Australia, across other jurisdictions, and in other countries around the world. These might be unique gatherings of companies that don't usually come together, those courageous collaborations, or it might be things like the High Level Oceans Panel, where you've got PMs, prime ministers, presidents from a variety of countries who've come together with a shared mutual objective to move the dial when it comes to oceans governance and dealing with oceans issues, but also introducing these new ways of valuing what matters to community and society within oceans. We also highlighted contemporary ocean planning and regulation, and this is a really critical piece to anyone who uses the oceans, but we are looking at how to ensure oceans planning and regulation is not held back and discourages innovation, that it's a way, that it is a platform for thriving communities, thriving industries who can be reactive and responsive, and if not lead to some of these new concepts around offsetting the carbon markets again, and biodiversity markets, and then nature-based reporting and climate-related reporting. We've identified this opportunity to build an ocean economy balance sheet, and I'll touch on that shortly. We also highlighted meaningful collaboration, those courageous conversations, working with community, working with consumers, and really, together working on those material topics, those what matters aspects. And that was such an important piece if you look at the evolution of sustainability reporting in the environmental, social governance, sustainability space. Sustainability reporting, it just gets you through the door now. What investors, what community, what retailers and the markets are looking for is a lot more information. They are looking to see where people are striving. They are looking to see where people are on those journeys. And then we really identified what are some of those building blocks or ingredients around contemporary ocean industries. And in this case, we looked at Tasmanian salmon. And straight away, what we're talking about is supporting a sustainable food system and model. Talking about growing an ocean workforce, growing aquaculture diversity and opportunity, driving innovation, and a really exciting piece here is decarbonising the aquaculture and the supply chain operations. So with this in mind, what we're really looking at or is noticing that to date, growth of these industries and this sector in particular, it's very much been driven by growth, like production-based growth targets. And what we really thought was, let's adopt a broader balance sheet that allows us to move away from economic and production growth targets and begin promoting growth and operations which aligns with our natural, social, and economic ESG ecosystem that industries are operating in. So how do we do that? Well, one of our concepts here is sustainable growth can be defined by the capacity of a natural system using an ocean economy balance sheet. So we're balancing with nature and we're supporting by innovation. And we really believe that this offers a new way of planning, a new way of communicating, and also reporting on progress, so transparency and disclosure. So what's really sitting behind this growth concept is the ocean economy balance sheet. So what are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about a system-wide balance sheet that uses ocean impact accounting, and it can provide a unique insight into what we're calling our trade-offs and the various activities that have impact against our defined ESG clusters. We've watched this with greenhouse gas emission reporting, disclosure, not just financial, but also to government under compulsory elements, depending on what size business you are. But then also, how do we bring in other values, material topics that are really important to the community, whether that's freshwater, whether that's biodiversity, waste, or social attributes. So this, we believe, will allow industry, government, and the community to determine, how best can industry, or when you're leaning on nature, also nature, be able to minimize, eliminate, offset, or restore those impacts through innovation and other activities. Because what we're looking for is neutral, if not positive, impact across a defined geography or a sector. So we think that this approach offers ocean industries efficiencies, It reduces those risks, including decommissioning or deregistering risks that are no longer present. It increases transparency and reduces sectoral inefficiencies by introducing a more holistic ESG value mapping and reporting system. And as I touched on, this is risk and impact and disclosure focused, but what will sit behind it is assured data sets, credible peer-reviewed evidence that can improve our conversation around sustainability when it comes to, in this case, farm seafood or other ocean industries, or the relationship between those. So ultimately what we're doing here is building sustainable ocean literacy. So if we've got a goal, which is to establish an oceans economy balance sheet that supports government and industry decision-making, communication across ESG impacts within these seascapes, we identified a series of immediate actions that we're proposing either we can take on or others we're suggesting take on as well. And I'll touch on some projects we've got underway in a minute. This ranges from mapping those ESG values, mapping First Nation cultural values, developing this ocean economy balance sheet model, auditing contemporary ocean mapping and data sets, and, linking to Atlas projects, etc. Stock taking national and international ecosystem-based management and dynamic marine spatial planning developments, threats, challenges, and those opportunities. Profiling and supporting nature-based solutions, the role of wetlands and seaweed in removing nutrients, and auditing circular economy opportunities with the view of developing transition plans to reduce emissions, freshwater usage, and waste across the full value chain. So this kind of activity will have a variety of impacts across the industry and beyond, but ultimately it should reduce risk for new, emerging and transitioning industries, enhance ecosystem understanding and oversight of cumulative impacts. Quite often, planning, regulatory processes are activity A, then activity B and activity C, and we're looking for a more cumulative approach here. Incentives for innovation and investment in achieving that neutral or positive impact on identified ESG values and promoting nature-based solutions in industry, and ultimately increasing our circular economy outcomes. So we're confident that this kind of approach, this evolution that pulls together a variety of really contemporary processes and programs that are on the table at the moment, can drive an innovative and sustainable aquaculture industry. We've got more information available on our website in our ambition document, our What We Heard document, which really is that base material. And for us, what we're really focused on is a variety of projects. And if you continue to listen to future Blue Economy CRC webinar series, you'll learn more about those. The Marine Spatial Planning Project, an Ocean Accounting Project, and our balance sheet model scoping. But we want to be part of this conversation, and it's really just a conversation that's started. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this, Angela. Now it's time for the second speaker. Early morning for him as well. Peter Landschutzer is a research director at the Vlaanders Marine Institute in Ostend, Belgium, and has previously worked for the Max Planck Institute for Meteorology and in Germany and the Swiss Federal Institute for Technology. While being interested in many aspects of the ocean in the Earth system, Peter's research focus is set on ocean biogeochemistry and the marine carbon cycle. His expertise ranges from carbon measurements through big data modeling using artificial neural networks, and he will discuss today the challenges in building up a measurement network that is fit for purpose to monitor the pathway towards carbon neutrality and support the blue economy in their carbon accounting exercises. So Peter, the floor is yours.
Sorry, just a second, small hiccup. There we go. All right. Well, thank you very much, Christine, and thank you very much to the Blue Economy and the Blue Cluster for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Now, as Christine introduced already, my expertise is really on the scientist and the science side, I've been doing carbon budgets for, well, quite a long time now, almost 10 years. But working together with the blue economy is also something new to me. And I recently learned that I should actually define what I mean with carbon budget in my title, because it means quite different things to different communities. Now, what I mean here with challenges in closing marine carbon budgets is trying to understand all the flows into a certain region and out of a certain ocean region of our interest, where particular economical activities take place. So now, why would we be interested as scientists in these flows of carbon? That is purely or simply saying for verification reasons. Now, verification on the one hand for certain economical activities, but also for verification of the use of nature-based solutions and so forth. Why do we actually care about verification? Well, on the one hand, it gives us sort of confidence that our actions that we wanted to do, or the agendas that we try to implement, are actually effective. But on the other hand, verification also gives confidence. So we can sort of bring sort of more confidence so to the outside that that we should really invest in for example, nature-based solution. But what are now the scientific challenges of this budget, and in particular of verifying economical activities or the effect of nature-based solutions? Now, on the one hand is we have the challenge of understanding what's sort of a long-term storage solution versus a short-term storage solution. Now, this more relates to nature-based solutions, and I'll bring an example in a moment, because really to be effective for climate in the long run, we really want to find solutions that sequester carbon not for a year or 2 or 5, but really for centuries to millennia, if possible. Now, a second problem when we think of carbon budgets, of carbon flows in any direction of a certain economical certain interesting region for economic activities, is that we have quite substantial natural or background flow. So that the term natural is a bit problematic in the sense that humanity has already altered pretty much every system on Earth. So the term natural, so the anthropogenic flows and natural flows are very difficult to distinguish. So I'd like to prefer to talk about background carbon fluxes and carbon exchanges. And then on top of that, we have human activities that on top of that background that we actually try to measure, to understand, to provide verification. Now, there was quite a lot of introduction, but I think an example would probably be more useful in this case. And as we do as scientists, we like to create pretty pictures. So this was pretty much all the text that I wanted to go through. And for the rest, I'll show you some pretty pictures. Now, let's consider an exclusive economic zone of any country that you would like to imagine. And we have this great idea to plant a seagrass meadow to take up CO2 from the ocean, and ideally, in a next step, sequester it in the sediments for quite a long time. I mean, I think we all agree that this is a very good idea and sort of a substantial contribution to mitigate climate change. Now, what we as scientists now are concerned about is whether we can actually measure the effect. So we plant the seagrass meadows. How can we actually tell for sure how much CO2, and now in terms of grams or tons or kilograms of carbon per a certain time, this seagrass meadow actually takes up, and how much of it is sequestered in the sediments, which then can further on be sort of translated in monetary values. And why is this problematic? That is because we've got many, many different processes that are happening at the same time, which are these natural or background processes. So on the one hand, we have physical transport, we have flows from currents, we have exchange with the deeper ocean. We have also offshore transport, we have tidal transport. So we have actually sort of a physical mix of waters in our coastal zones. We have exchange with the ERC interface, so the ocean and the atmosphere had constant interaction with each other. We have the inorganic carbon buffers in the ocean. And last but not least, we also have got the biological carbon pump. And when you think about all these natural processes that happen actually simultaneously to our use case, which is now the seagrass, or if you want, the mangrove forest, we actually try to find the needle in a haystack. And then coming to my second point, or what was initially my first point in my introduction, the slide before, we also want to sequester obviously the carbon for a long time. But what we have also is other human activities that are linked to sediment disruption, which then actually re-released the carbon that was stored in the sediment back to the ocean. So even though we can sort of verify that the seagrass meadow is sort of a very useful way to take up carbon and to store it in the sediments, if we are not able to keep it for a long time, we essentially end up having a null operation. So you see that there's a lot of challenges when that you have to consider if you really want to try to scientifically underpin the effect of a nature-based solution, or if you want to try to account for economical activities. And so my pledge today is very simple. My pledge is that we have actually the means to measure those background carbon fluxes. However, what we need is a very dense observing system to do so. And in very few places of this planet, this measurement system is at place. And this is because many scientists are in the position that I am, that working together with the blue economy, working together with blue carbon is a rather new field, and we still have to build up that knowledge, and we have to still build up this measurement network that provides this knowledge of the background carbon fluxes, so we can really verify the activities we're planning to do. So to finally bring my one and most essential point on the table is that to provide a strong evidence base regarding carbon dioxide removal, but also other economical activities that we're interested in, we really need a dense observing network, which is for many regions of the planet not yet in place. And that is something that, working together with scientists, the blue economy can very much benefit from. Many thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Next up is Jim Smart. He's an associate professor in the School of Environment and Science at the Griffith University in Brisbane. Jim is an environmental economist and has published more than 60 peer-reviewed research papers on ecosystem services, non-market valuation, and mechanisms for incentivizing improvements in environmental quality, particularly improvements in water quality. Jim's current research interests include environmental economic accounting and ocean accounting. And drawing on recent examples from Australia, Jim will be discussing how synergies between the environmental economic accounts and readily accessible fit-for-purpose carbon estimation tools can help to stimulate investments and emerging opportunities for carbon sequestration. Jim, you can start sharing your screen.
Thank you very much, Christine. Let me try and share my screen here. How's that looking? Have we got full screen slides there, please?
No, we see the comments.
Okay, the ones with the...
Yeah.
How about that one?
Looks perfect, Jim.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody in Australia. Good morning to everybody in Europe. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you briefly this afternoon. What I'll be talking about really is looking at how carbon estimation methods and environmental economic accounts, and particularly really ocean accounts, can be used to turn challenges into opportunities around carbon reduction. So in the next few minutes, I'm aiming to provide really some discussion starters on this topic, using the example of stimulating investment in greenhouse gas reduction opportunities in Australia through the tidal restoration of blue carbon ecosystems. Now, a particular challenge around sections of Australia's coastline, it's arisen where coastal wetlands have been drained historically to provide agricultural land. And it turns out that in many locations around Australia, draining coastal wetlands have actually produced pretty poor agricultural land. There's problems with low productivity, problems with acid sulfate soils, and of course there's also the loss of the multiple beneficial ecosystem services that the wetlands would have provided. So overall, in quite a number of locations, draining coastal wetlands has often turned out to be a poor investment. And it's often produced stranded assets in the form of low quality agricultural land, drainage systems, bunds, and tidal gates. So there's a challenge. And we're also very aware of a necessity. We know that there's a very urgent necessity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Australia has signed up to make nationally determined contributions to GHG reductions under the Paris Agreement. Recently agreed to a 43% reduction on 2005 emission levels by 2030. So that means there's a necessity, a real strong pressure to move towards net zero emissions. And increasingly, and probably quite rightly, there's increasing pressure to go beyond net zero to try and get us back onto a climate positive trajectory. And it's clear that carbon offsetting will have a role to play in this. However, as we're all very aware, over the past 6 months in particular, it's absolutely vital that carbon offsets come from sources and mechanisms that are efficient, effective, credible, and verifiable. Okay, so this takes us across to the opportunity, the blue carbon opportunity. Again, as many of us will be aware, over the past decade, there's been a very considerable amount of very high quality science undertaken internationally and in Australia to establish a number of features and facts around blue carbon. The first thing that's been scientifically established is that these blue carbon ecosystems, seagrass, mangroves, tidal marsh, and supratidal forests can be extremely effective at sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing away carbon in woody biomass and soils. First thing. The second thing that's been established is that at appropriate locations where these coastal wetlands have been drained historically to produce what's turned out to be low value agricultural land, those blue carbon ecosystems can be restored. And they can be restored at modest cost by opening tidal gates and re-engineering the hydrology to reinstate the tidal flows. So with that tidal restoration, tidal reinstatement, seagrass, mangroves, tidal marsh, and supratidal forests would re-establish naturally. Exactly what re-establishes would depend on factors like the tidal range, the seed banks existing at the sites, and the natural vegetation types for the locality. However, one thing that we also know is that to actually implement the benefits of carbon sequestration through blue carbon ecosystems at a nationally meaningful scale, we're going to need significant private market investment to do this. Significant private market investment coming into tidal restoration of blue carbon ecosystems. And those potential investors and project proponents need to know that their investments in tidal restoration of blue carbon ecosystems will produce a stream of high quality, high reliability, high value carbon credits, sufficient to produce a good return, an adequate return on their investments. This requires several things to attract that private market investment. It requires a market pathway, ideally a government-backed mechanism. And in Australia, that's the federal government's emissions reduction fund market, the ERF market in Australian carbon credit units, ACUs. Another thing it requires is a scientifically robust methodology for quantifying the number of carbon credits that are generated. That's the tidal restoration of blue carbon ecosystems methodology. A further requirement, though, is a tool, a readily accessible, pretty easy to use tool that will allow project proponents to estimate how many carbon credits the blue carbon ecosystems at a potential tidal restoration site could actually be expected to produce, and over what time scale. And that's what the BlueCam tool that's mentioned on this slide here does. That BlueCam tool allows project proponents to estimate the carbon credits, the stream of carbon credits that they would likely get from restoring a site, without having to make any on-site measurements of carbon storage or greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, the tool does require some information. It requires basic mapping information about the location of the site, the ecosystem types and land uses that were on the site before the tidal flows were reinstated, and it needs to know something about the tidal flows and the level of tidal inundation across the site after reinstatement. Now, all of this is endorsed by the Australian federal government. And crucially here, as we can see on this slide, that BlueCam tool has been developed with robust scientific backing. So, through this combination of detailed scientific understanding of tidal restoration of blue carbon ecosystems, government endorsement of blue carbon tidal restoration carbon credits for sale on the Emission Reduction Fund's carbon market, and then the government's investment to produce the BlueCam tool to enable the investors to assess their potential returns from investing in blue carbon tidal restoration sites. In combination, as a consequence of all of those things, tidal restoration of blue carbon ecosystems is now becoming a reality around Australia's coastline. So, I've talked there about how robust scientific understanding, coupled with government endorsement of tidal restoration of blue carbon credits and BlueCam as a tool to allow the investment opportunities to be assessed, how in combination they've enabled tidal restoration of blue carbon ecosystems to get off the ground as, hopefully, an efficient, effective, credible, and verifiable source of carbon credits. What can ocean accounts contribute? How can ocean accounts actually add value here? Well, ocean accounts are an emerging international infrastructure for storing and reporting data about ocean and coastal environments, and how ecosystem assets and abiotic and biotic resources in those environments deliver value to our economies and to us as individuals and as society. Now, ocean accounts comprise multiple different components and they can be used for multiple different purposes. For example, they could contribute key data to the Sustainable Ocean Ambition and Ocean Impact Balance Sheet that Angela described to us earlier. But to stay on topic here, how can ocean accounts bring additional value to tidal restoration of blue carbon ecosystems? Now, within ocean accounts, there's an important component called an asset account. Those asset accounts report on the extent, so the size and the condition of ecological assets and biotic and abiotic resources in the oceans and along the shorelines, along the coastlines. So that includes those blue carbon assets, mangroves, seagrass, salt marsh. So regularly compiled ocean accounts, updated regularly, potentially via remote sensing and potentially in the future via the sort of sensor networks that Peter was describing to us, those ocean accounts can be used to corroborate, substantiate the changes in extent and condition of these blue carbon ecosystems that would follow from the tidal restoration. Equally usefully though, ocean accounts can also report on the additional co-benefits that are delivered through tidal restoration of blue carbon ecosystems. What are those co-benefits? There are co-benefits such as improvement in water quality, improvements in habitat or expansion of habitat for fish species and migratory birds, restoration of cultural value to indigenous traditional owners. So those co-benefits, evidenced via regularly compiled ocean accounts, can add additional value to the stream of carbon credits. So I'm just about to close now, together with the foundational science, the government backing, and the tool development that we described earlier, regularly compiled ocean accounts, I think, have an important contribution to make in realizing carbon opportunities in the oceans. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Jim.
Just need
Next
to stop
up-
sharing.
Yes, indeed. So now it's time for the last presentation of this webinar, which is a duo presentation. We have Marnie Outen, who co-leads the nature-based emissions solutions offering with the Deloitte Climate and Sustainability practice. And as an experienced sustainability executive, Marnie is developing practical solutions to enable industry stakeholders to move forward on their decarbonization programs. The second speaker is Rick Shaw, who is an Australian Indigenous man from northern New South Wales. He is a mathematician and actuary with experience in the development and review of economic capital models and the design and implementation of regulatory systems. He has extensive overseas and Australian experience and is recognized internationally for his work on capital modeling, regulatory systems, and pricing and valuation. They will present and discuss the practical and cost-effective Indigenous-led holistic valuations that they have been using for blue carbon and broader natural capital ocean projects. Marnie, Rick, all yours.
Thank you, and it is wonderful to be here with a large audience from all over the world. I'm actually sitting back and reflecting on the maturing nature of this conversation compared to even 12 months ago, where we weren't seeing a lot of sophisticated insights or even you know, a lot of material wasn't available on what this topic is becoming, you know, and will become a more important strategic theme and topic in the future. So let's get started. So Rick, I'm not sure if I can see you on the video yet, but I'm just going to provide a little bit of context about the practical attempts that Rick and I have been having to translate what the challenges that Peter described, the opportunity that Angela described, and even what Jim described in this fantastic, I liked his charts very much around, you know, what's going on in these ecosystems. And we're just going to challenge about what, you know, how do we put it in practice and who's going to use this and how do we get started? So it's a bit of a call to action this session. Just a little bit of context. So Deloitte's been working closely with groups such as the World Economic Forum and the World Wildlife Fund on valuing nature and also interviewing and reviewing and preparing, I think, our financial institutions around the importance on banking on natural capital and unlocking this sort of investment appetite in considering nature as absolutely something that's worth investing in as we become able, and I think they go hand in glove in terms of the ability to value and measure the impact and the value of nature and how we actually use that in investment decisions. And with an estimated $44 trillion worth of you know, value or economic value linked to this, that's over half of the world's economic output is 100% is reliant on nature. So this topic of today is really talking about how do we move forward and get that Indigenous, if we consider the fact that the oldest land managers and the first scientists of our land and water were Indigenous peoples, and they've observed you know, millions of years of carbon cycles and the relationships that shape the landscape. You know, how do we bring that into these conversations that we're having today? And I think, you know, there's this sort of tendency in the language that gets used at the moment of the co-benefits of the project beyond carbon. And I think when we talk about the oceans, we need to be really conscious that carbon is actually just one of the many benefits. And what's at the core is really, you know, the biodiversity, and the benefits are others, and carbon is almost the co-benefits. And I've come on a journey personally since I helped the Blue Economy CRC prepare a paper exactly 12 months ago on ocean carbon markets in Australia and New Zealand. And through the journey I've been going through since understanding who's playing a role in ocean carbon markets, which are very immature, but who could potentially play a role, I think this sort of understanding that we're dealing with what Peter described as quite fundamentally challenged carbon cycles from a permanency perspective. So all these things are part of my way of introducing my colleague Rick, who I think has that perfect combination of a lifetime of working as an actuary in complex financial models and comes from a lifetime of understanding Indigenous people and has a real respect and curiousness around Indigenous peoples around the world and how they can value nature. So I want to pass over to Rick, who's the real hero in this story today, and then we'll come back and say a few words around how we're applying this to some real life projects and examples. Over to you, Rick.
Marnie, I need you to give that intro to my kids because I'd like to impress them. Hi, what I'm talking today about, it builds on Peter. What Peter and Jim are, they're scientists who look into the way we measure things. What I'm bringing here is, as a mathematician and actuary, is a manner in which I stand beside the scientists who put in place systems for measurement and bring the whole thing. And as Marnie says, there's lots of different aspects to an ecosystem. So you need the world is sophisticated, the world is complex and non-linear. So to properly model it, you need a complex and non-linear model. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the technical stuff, but I'm going to talk to the greater challenge. What I see as a greater challenge is convincing people that have people who make investment decisions that the most important, that things other than money has value. That to me is a greater challenge. So what we've got on the slide here now is the background was about a year or so ago, the Deloitte economists approached me. They were doing some work for the state government in Australia to value the marine estate, 3 nautical miles out, 1 terrestrial mile in. They were struggling with the standard cost-benefit analysis approach that the economists use. And they asked me if I could, they initially got me involved to look into the value of Indigenous cultural aspects in the land. I want to talk to you about this later, Jim, but this is it's an important part of something to consider an evaluation system. But to think about Indigenous value as something that sits in the land that is to be valued as, say, the agricultural produce or fishing or tourism is valued, is in itself, it's a bit of a neo-colonial way to approach things. So I want to, so what I did was develop a model. My background was in complex financial modeling, as I used to model a lot of security. I was in New York, based in New York, modeling a lot of fancy investment portfolios, and I've done a lot of modeling of natural catastrophes like Atlantic hurricanes and Japanese earthquakes. So this model is what's on the slide here is just a quick representation of the elements of a system that you would want to value, because the standard economic approach is to break a system down into its subcomponents, say in this tourism, employment, and so on and so forth. Get data on all those subcomponents, add them all up, and that's your value. But what it misses out is that those things that we as a human value, such as the quality of the water, the quality of the air, the biodiversity in the system. And importantly, it also misses out the very complex thing that is very important in evaluation is to model the relationships between the different components, because in Aboriginal culture, it is the relationships between things is where the value is. So technically what this model is, it's for those economists here, it's a fancy willingness to pay method. But for the statisticians here, it's developed out into a Bayesian inference network. I don't want to go into the technical details here because but I absolutely totally love talking about it. It's just and so if anyone wants to know more about the technical details, just feel free to reach out to us. But what it basically does is whatever measurements Peter referred to the problem of needing dense measurement. One of the things about a Bayesian approach is that it can be built on scanty data, and the model automatically improves as you get more data in. So I think that's a very important part of what we're doing here. Is let's not wait till we have all the data there. I'm very experienced in modeling complex systems with very little data, and there's standard statistical and actuarial approaches for doing this. I just want to say, so I've got on here that Indigenous value, and so you build this model, and if you look at the if you look at the climate change, sort of the big orange box, what you do, you build this model, and the way you build this model is you go and find out from local people, particularly local Indigenous people, what is of value in this system. And the amount of information you get is unbelievable. And Marnie and I've got a few stories about how getting local Aboriginal people involved in a mangrove restoration project just changed the way the scientists were going about the stuff. So it's really important to get that local knowledge, because we all love to think we're evidence-based, and if we do like to think of ourselves as evidence-based, we should use what in Australia is 100,000 years of evidence about what works. I'll just finish off now. Look at by saying,
yeah, you're good, Rick, because I wanted to bring forward how we're talking about this with groups around the world and bringing it together and contributing to other sort of models.
So I'm as an Aboriginal actuary, what I've done is build a valuation system. I'm bringing together Western approaches with building a valuation system based on my cultural principles. So what we're doing, we're talking to a lot of, it's been very well received by people who work in the blue economy space, who are doing good things. And we're talking to Australian government, and also I've shared this with Indigenous people from overseas, South America, North America, and the Kiwis in New Zealand, the Maori, and it's been very well received. Marnie and I are looking to take this out to corporates who can fund good positive activity, and we're also in particular we're talking to anybody who is in a position to be able to establish international accounting standards. And there, if you might be aware of an entity called Accounting for Nature, and we're working quite closely with them. A lot of you will be familiar with the SIA approach, and what we've got here is consistent. And I'll just finish up, Marnie, by saying we need putting First Nations ways central to what we value and how we value. It seems to be the crucial step in sort of addressing existential problems. And I am concerned that there is a tendency there's a focus on market-based solutions, which, I like that line of Einstein, that no problem can be solved by the same consciousness that created it. So I'm going to stop there. It's a
good point to end on, Rick. Thank you. And I just personally want to wrap up and say that at the Ocean Business Leaders summit in Australia a few weeks ago, where some of our listeners today may have attended. It was really positive to hear global leaders of the TNFD, which is the Task Force for Nature-Based Financial Disclosures, talk about the ecosystem services in the language that we also speak about, and then the way that we need to treat oceans differently to land-based evaluations for nature. There's definitely a movement around nature positive and around these opportunities to look at whether it's offshore, onshore infrastructure projects or blue economy activities that Angela talked about, and to say, how do we ensure that those sustainable activities are hitting a nature positive? So all these types of activities are driving a demand for us to more accurately value and don't undervalue nature, and bring it down to that project level valuation, so that that can help what we talked about in terms of unlocking investment and really implementing what needs to happen, all to support and reverse climate change as we see it. So these are some of the themes that we'll continue to discuss, and I'm really looking forward to maybe coming back in a year's time, Angela and crew, and hopefully there's some progress that we can share on a number of projects that we're actually doing some implementation and proving out these type of valuation tools and methods as we mature in our own thinking about how to make them cost effective, accessible, and benefiting communities all around the world, and especially those communities who don't have deep pockets to fund for really extensive analysis. So how do we make this whole thing work and unlock potential? So thank you. That's it from us, and we're probably over time for our section. And we're probably, I think, handing over for a bit of a Q&A.
Yeah, that's correct, Marnie. Rick, thank you. Thank you all for the insightful presentations. And this is clearly a topic worth to discuss and investigate further. And as many questions remain, and action is urgent, as we all know, we want to take this opportunity also to bring together the marine carbon community and create a discussion forum where knowledge can be exchanged, but also questions can be asked. And as such, the development of these carbon accounting schemes might be accelerated. I'll share the link in the Q&A later on. And this forum is open to anyone who wants to contribute, whether it's with knowledge or with questions. So if you're interested in joining, just follow the link that I will share in the Q&A in a minute. So now it's time for some active discussion. Go to Slido. The code is 3422569, and I see that most of you have already found their way towards the Slido. And the first easy question was about which audience we are having, but it seems that the sharing part is not working very well for the moment. Kini, can you try again to share? Yeah, apologies. I'll just move on to the first panel question. If we can, well, we're trying to fix the Slido part. So for all panelists, do you believe, do you see that marine carbon accounting can be a driver to fight climate change? How can we make this meaningful, and how will we make a difference with this? And I would also like to ask the other speakers to turn their cameras back on. Thank you. So maybe Jim, if you could share your thoughts about how to make this a meaningful way of including carbon accounting to fight climate change.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so accounting for the carbon sequestration that natural assets in the oceans and along the coastline deliver to us is an important part of accounting for where countries, nations are standing with regard to their emissions reduction commitments. So that's really a lot of the rationale that sits behind ocean accounting. Carbon accounting on terrestrial environments is reasonably well established. The carbon sequestration that's happening in forests and woodlands and other terrestrial ecosystems, that's already captured in what are called, actually what Rick referred to, the SEEA ecosystem accounts. Ocean accounts extend that sort of philosophy out into the oceans. So that what they're doing is they're making visible the contributions of ecosystem assets in the ocean, how much carbon is being sequestered, how much carbon is being stored by those assets. That does several things. I say it allows you to include that carbon sequestration and storage within the remit of your national management, if you like, of emissions, but it also allows you to credit and recognize the benefits that would come from restoring both and increasing the extent of those ecosystems and improving their condition. That's the sort of thing I was talking about in my presentation. So I think the carbon accounting can actually play quite an important role in evidencing how important these natural assets are for sequestering and storing the carbon. Unless we're accounting for that, it's essentially invisible. So we have to make it visible, and the ocean accounts and the carbon accounting component within ocean accounts and the carbon accounting component in terrestrial ecosystem accounts aim to do exactly that.
Okay, thank you, Jim. If I look at the Slido, then I see that 90% of the audience, or of the people who are voting on the Slido at least, agree with the fact that carbon accounting systems can be a driver to fight climate change. Jim, there was also a question for you in the Zoom Q&A. I'll just read it out loud. If I understand Jim correctly, then tidal restoration needs to produce carbon credits to attract investment, and these carbon credits will allow for companies to emitting industries for longer. So how can tidal restoration result in real reductions of atmospheric CO2?
Yeah, so is that back to me again? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question, Arno. Yeah, no, that you make a very valid point. If all we ever do is offset, we just stay where we are. Yeah, there's no improvement. So offsetting has a role to play, however. I think it has a role to play in facilitating a pathway. The pathway to make the reductions, as I'm sure you're well aware, is actually to tighten the emission caps within which the offsetting, to which the offsets can contribute. However, if we allow companies to offset the full extent of their exceedance of those caps, then we're not actually making any meaningful improvements. So we need to have a serious discussion politically around whether it is actually acceptable to allow the full extent of emission exceedances to be offset. Okay. What offsets do, as again, I'm sure you're well aware, is that they reduce the cost of tightening the caps. And in a way that makes that more politically acceptable. And it allows the caps to be tightened in a, actually it allows you to push that sort of thing through the political mechanism.
Tim, I might jump in as well if
you
want some help, because I was thinking about the broader themes of obviously carbon markets, but we probably haven't discussed enough about the maturing of other markets. In Australia, we've got the birth of what's called the nature repair market. Other countries are talking about, sort of biodiversity offset markets. And again, where they get used is really important and linked to this policy of driving the right behaviours, because before we do any of this, we want to obviously stop destroying, you know, and polluting the world we live in. And so, but is there, where do these markets fit in? And the movement around nature positive is sort of looking at where there is infrastructure projects or roads being built or airports or other types of projects. How do you measure and make sure that overall that project is hitting a balance when it comes to the biodiversity impact and giving back within the project boundaries? And I think that we're going to see a lot more of this, you know, globally, as the way to regulate and control and even use that as a proxy financial investment as part of a project, avoiding the need to sort of purchase broader offsets or do something else outside of the project boundaries. So I just wanted to sort of mention that as well as something that is and when that links to ocean markets. I think there's also a trend, especially with the international VERA, voluntary carbon markets. We're seeing a lot more emphasis on the non-carbon benefits of projects, and this is where it's not so much carbon accounting, but it's what you mentioned before, natural capital accounting and other broader accounting methods are well and truly proven to be used to reliably measure the impact of other benefits linked to those projects, and that's being factored into the pricing mechanisms for some of those voluntary carbon units that are sold in the international markets. Not sure if that answered or extended on that question, Kristen.
Yeah, thanks for jumping in as well, Marnie. Of course, all panelists can jump in. We opened the next Slido question as well, whether the audience believes that we need a global or a regional carbon system, or maybe even both. So for now, it seems that we are heading for the both option. And there's a question in the Zoom as well, that there seems to be a contradiction between the need for observation-based and scientifically robust carbon accounting. So the presentation of Peter, and then the fact that we actually need a simple system. So I don't know, Peter, could you elaborate on that question?
Yes, so I've just read it myself now. So I don't think that my talk and the talk from Jim contradict each other. So I think we're both on the same page that sort of the basis what we first need to have is scientific evidence, a verification based on evidence, an evidence-based verification system. But however, the communication still is to be simple. And I think this is what Jim, correct me if I'm wrong. So I think we both agree that the scientific evidence needs to form the basis. However, the translation should be simple. Is that about correct, Jim?
So maybe where this comes together is the use of data and intelligent data. And I've been exposed to some amazing technology like satellite-based, you know, for land-based carbon calculators that can be done literally from remote measurement of carbon sort of value. So I see that as a simple solution. Obviously, it's very technical in the background, but for users, and I think there was a question on the list here about sort of community carbon accounting. Sort of, you know, how can members of the community access amazing data so that they themselves can directly do what you said, the evidence-based data. They don't have to rely on experts and very expensive equipment to be able to access that. So if we think about a vision for the future, and Angela's got some great visions about where we can go with this stuff, I think there's about tapping into, you know, central pools of data, which a lot of it in the ocean is quite, you know, there's a lot of data we don't have from the ocean, but in the future we need to somehow pull together whatever data we do have and create quite amazing access opportunities to that data and translate that into ways users can use that and measure their own projects and opportunities with open source data.
Absolutely agree. I mean, open science is key and crucial. I mean, also for the confidence building, right? I mean, it's, you know, it shouldn't be a black box. It should be open. It should be transparent. It should be visible. I'd also like to make one point and I would completely agree with what you said, Rick. You know, we shouldn't wait for the observing system either. So it shouldn't be an excuse to postpone action. But I think it's something that we need to develop alongside. So very important point, Rick, that we shouldn't wait until we have these observing systems, because it will take a while to get it.
Yeah, and indeed, I think there's, sorry, Rick, go ahead.
I was just going to agree with Peter agreeing with me, but I actually think there's a lot of blocks to activity here, and a lot of people trying to lots and lots of words around natural capital accounting and without any actual action. And I think that we haven't got the data, we haven't got the methodology. I actually think they're blocks to action, because there's a lot of vested interest in things staying as they are.
Angela, we haven't heard from you yet in the panel, so I have a question for you. It seems now that most audience is going for the both option, both a local and a global system. But how do you think these tools can be used or should be used if it's technically possible? We all believe it's technically possible to achieve tools, easy tools to adopt a carbon system. But what do you think is necessary for both policy and industries to actually start adopting that system, because there are already many reporting systems?
Yeah, I think it's a really important aspect here, and that also takes into account the scale of industries. If you're looking at agricultural fisheries, for example, you can go from the multinationals, the big globals who have teams of staff who are dedicated to sustainability reporting, collecting data, sharing that as part of their compliance and regulatory regime, talking to investors. But then we've also got sectors that are full of mum and dads and, you know, much smaller operations. So how do we come up with methods and ways to participate in this conversation so that at the moment, all of our ocean users who already are custodians and stewards in many ways of ocean health, because they are trying to produce seafood or you know, as we look towards new and emerging industries, energy from our oceans, and they're looking to do it in a way that is, as we said, neutral or biodiversity positive. So being able to come up with a system that makes sense for if you are already an ocean user and you are a user who may be part of a sector. So how do you do that at a sectoral level? Or how do you do that as a company level if you trigger a particular, whether it's an economic trigger or, you know, off the back of Montreal, global companies are going to be required to do a particular type of reporting. How do you bring that into the mix so that no one gets left behind, that you have a level playing field? One of the pieces with aquaculture, and I saw one of the questions in our Q&A, which really said, hey, the blue carbon methodology in Australia is for wild, it's for natural environments, it's not for farmed. So what can you do in the farmed space from an aquaculture perspective? And that's a really good question. And there are a lot of companies in kelp and in seaweed and other species who are doing like polyculture operations, who are sitting there going, well, how do we look at our total operations? How do we create net neutral, no harm farms? What does that look like? And so from that perspective, trying to develop methodology that can be signed off by ERF that allows you to be able to look into this is a really critical piece. And that's going to take time. That's not an instant. Let's get the data, let's get the results now, and let's look at what that means. And so being able to access projects that are also underway in elsewhere in the world, looking at those methodologies and then looking at how you apply that to our temperate or our tropical environments in Australia is going to be really important. And so rather than us all talking about it, how do we come together and move that dial? How do we do that as a collective? Otherwise, aquaculture have access to biochar methodology and other aspects there. And, you know, when we're talking about carbon and we're looking at nature-based solutions, you know, yes, it goes towards seaweed. You know, there are also aspects there around what does that mean for biofouling, not just farming. What, you know, there are all these other contributors here that we haven't quite explored yet. So when we're talking about blue carbon accounting, there are two parts here. One is this nature-based natural systems. What does that look like? The other is industry that is looking to mimic nature and create their own environment and create their own assets that feed into the balance sheet. And so being able to make decisions across these that are best for the geography, that actually make sense at a seascape, so those regional levels, is going to be really, really critical. But I don't think that this is just going to be as straightforward necessarily as some of those broader equations to land-based activities at the moment based on the methodologies. Hence, why this panel is also about let's form a gang, let's get people together who are interested in this work. Let's share our experiences, share our methods, share these projects, look at where we can dovetail, and then bring that back to different sectors, whether they are investors, whether it's government, and government looking to offset things they should be doing normally, but now that there's so much focus, they know they can't do it alone, or industry who is looking to, you know, undertake their directions and in pursuit of neutral, if not biodiversity positive activities. And I think Marnie touched on something really neat. Carbon is such a critical aspect of the equation, but it is also a component of nature more broadly. And if you look off at the back of Montreal and the recent Convention on Biological Diversity COP, I think that made it really, really clear. Nature's not just the, you know, cousin anymore. Nature's up front and center. So is there a way that we can do this together and that we can learn from, you know, the lags and lead that we've seen in the carbon space? Thank you.
One interesting question that's linked indeed with this topic as well is if there is or should be a conversation across the various industries or representatives for different ecosystems to actually identify the impacts of the different emission mitigation and reduction strategies. So it's indeed, is there a discussion going on not only on the carbon, but the ecosystem approach that has been coming back in several of the presentations as well. I don't know if Rick, you know something about that.
Oh yeah, look, it's a very crucial point that our standard linear modeling techniques used by economists and accountants, to the extent they're relevant, is tend to be do not allow for the interactions between the different components, and it's kind of a crucial part of what needs to be valued. So that's the question is, should there be a conversation? Absolutely. That's kind of one of the driving elements of the valuation system we're suggesting. I just want to say there's a lot of discussion going on around it, not just here, but generally around blue accounting, you know, the blue economy and carbon accounting and stuff. I mean, these are complex things to matter, but to value, to account for. But it's not like you know, the world, professions like mine, the actuarial profession and others, are very experienced in valuing very complex things. I mean, I've tried to work out the best way of presenting this. So one I'm coming up with, I used to say to economists, like, you know, how do you value your children? You can't just reduce the value of your children to cash flows. And the one I'm thinking about at the moment is like, there's a brand like Twitter somebody's valued the brand. I mean, that's a really nebulous concept and a really nebulous value. So we're good at valuing. We can value things if we want to. And I really don't think the valuation or the accounting method is a problem. What's the problem? The challenge is to get people in power to have the will to value the things that I'd like to think we all value.
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant way of looking at it. How do you value your children? It's spot on, I believe. And maybe we should start looking at nature as not only our mother, but also our child, so we will take care of it a bit better. We have opened the last question in the Slido, which is, Angela also touched upon it. You have big companies, but you have a lot of small companies as well. And there's already a lot of reporting. So let's say if there would come an extra reporting implication, are you willing as a company to invest in this? That's the question for the audience, but how does the panel look at this? Do they see a willingness to indeed invest in capturing data from companies and reporting this as well?
Maybe I'll jump in here.
Oh,
Oh, no, there you go.
no, you go.
Because I think this is a really important, theme and topic, is to say, well, how do you redistribute wealth in some ways? If you think about how the complex, how do you, those people that have access to nature all have a role to play. And I'm thinking about Angela and the community, sort of family seafood businesses or coastal communities. How can they play a role in global carbon markets? How can you bridge that gap between where we are today, where it's the large scale projects that are getting, in order for them to be, assessed and verified, and, sort of all the back office accounting type of services that need to be done. How do you actually package that up and make that accessible to anyone who has a potential role to play? And I see there's a supply and demand. We know that there's an investment demand that's just sort of getting bigger and bigger. And so I personally spending a lot of time trying to crack the code of how do you unlock the supply side of opportunities for those communities where it makes sense and it's sustainable and it's, aligned to methodologies and all the rest of it to play a role in carbon markets or nature repair markets or other things that are relevant. And there's definitely some opportunities that businesses are investing in, which is about supporting the law, reducing the barriers to enter. And I think there's investment needed in that space, but it's innovation, investment in innovation to make sure that the science that we know, Peter and Jim, and we know this information. So it's just about getting that to people who can use apps and using other sort of technologies maybe, or access information so that they can make their own assessments and legitimately play a role in these markets. So over to you, Angela.
Yeah, I think number one is let's look at how we immediately are decarbonising some of these industries. So I think there's a couple points here, and we can't lose sight of the role of where carbon accounting fits in the broader scheme. So if there's an ability in step one to decarbonise and what that looks like, and how innovation and investment beyond an individual company, it might be sector-wide, it might be land-based, it might be marine-based. When you're looking at, let's use ocean food, seafood as an example, is step one. And then step two is looking at how you can bundle up support and action. And we're already seeing it around ecosystem approaches to industries. So for example, under EPBC Act, you have strategic fisheries assessments, you're looking at fisheries in a particular way, and that takes away an onus of an individual company to be the owner of all the knowledge and all the data, and they provide their input, and then they use that to, really define what the operations of that particular fishery is. So how do we bring in some existing scales and clusters of activities to be able to support industries that aren't all the big end of town, aren't all your ASX listed multi-million kind of companies, so that they still have a part to play and that they're not disconnected. There is a real significant disconnect right now between a lot of the conversations on nature-based investment and practical on the ground, smaller production of ocean food and other oceans, utilization of other ocean services. So again, putting it in that balance sheet, understanding the broader system, looking at the different methods and models that are appropriate for the types and scales and sizes of those businesses and their impact, and what they're trying to achieve, I think, is a really important piece. I don't think we can do this without thinking about all of our stakeholders and all of their roles. And the other piece to this really comes down to ocean literacy. I know I touched on it earlier, but really understanding what is sustainability, what does it mean, how does it impact you if you're a producer, how does it impact you if you're a consumer, will ultimately drive the trends. And then equally around you know, sustainability investment into the existing industry, tangling, dare I say, like your green bonds, your sustainable linked loans, and all these other measures that are already in play. These aren't new things to this industry. They're already there. They're already being used. And so how do we bring that into the picture as well? So we've got a clear terrestrial advantage in this space. And what we're trying to do is unlock this ocean opportunity for our existing users, for people who are investing in great outcomes for the oceans and are ultimately looking for ocean health.
Okay, thank you. We are almost at the end of this this webinar, but there's a question. I think maybe it's the $1 million question as well. Do we know enough yet about the carbon characteristics of any offshore areas and possible carbon interventions to develop associated and robust carbon credit products? And that's a question that comes along a few times in different wording. So that's why I wanted to pop this question real quickly still. And
I think answer is it's the challenge. Yeah, it's the challenge and the opportunity for this group. And I encourage, maybe this is a good segue to say, how can we solve that together? Because maybe we need to reshift the thinking about what carbon markets are for the ocean. They're probably very different to what they look like in terrestrial land. And the reasons for doing it need to be sort of intermingled with the outcomes that are good for the, and can I say it, it's the global health that we're after. We're not just talking about ocean health, it's the balance of the earth that we live in. So I just think there is that sort of high level perspective to sort of say, look, the oceans work differently, but let's not copy and paste what's being done on land.
Okay, anyone else who wants to add something, Peter?
Just wanted to add something. I mean, from the presentation of Jim, you can see there are examples that of use cases where we actually have very good knowledge. But I would say for the majority of the global oceans, I would say we do not have this knowledge, and I think this is something we have to build towards.
Yeah. In coastal, we know. I think the summary is the oceans are the big dark unknown still, but the coastal stuff we know a lot better. So we need to, I think, rally some, you know, let's explore the oceans a bit more and how we can better understand them for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you all for sharing your views and insights. It's yeah, we've come at the end of this webinar, unfortunately, and it seems that we still have a lot of questions in the Q&A, so my apologies that we didn't tackle all questions, and I think we could continue this panel for a few hours still, but I'd like to invite everyone to join the discussion forum. It has been shared in the chat to everyone, so if you have any ideas on experts that should join this group, any questions, I'll try to add all the questions from the Q&A from the Zoom session also in that database so that we can continue working on this, and then we will definitely keep you posted on future initiatives, a bit depending on what the outcome, of course, is of the discussion forum. So that leaves me to thank everyone who made this webinar possible, the audience to start with. If there wouldn't be any audience, there wouldn't be any presentations either, and also the speakers. Thank you very much to to give your time and presentations, and of course the technical and supporting staff behind the screens. Also a big thank you to you. So I wish you all a lovely day if you're in Europe, or a lovely evening if you're in Australia, and hope to hear from you soon through the discussion forum. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in, everybody. The webinar recording will be available in the coming days, so keep an eye out on our website for any upcoming webinars and future events. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you to the Blue Cluster for an amazing facilitation. Thank you.